Broadcasting live from Business Radio X studios in Atlanta, Georgia, it's time for Learning Insights, featuring learning professionals improving performance to drive business results.
Welcome to another exciting and informative edition of Learning Insights. This is your host, Stone Payton, and in the studio with me this morning is my good buddy and co-host, Lee Cantor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Stone.
First up on Learning Insights this morning, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce from Kirkpatrick Partners, Mr. Jim Kirkpatrick. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, Stone.
So we are delighted to have you. As most of our listeners know, my wife has a real job, and it's in the learning arena. So I'm not completely unfamiliar with your name or your work. You're a little bit of a celebrity in this space. You've been talking about, writing about ROI for some time now, haven't you?
Well, absolutely. And looking at Jack here across the way, interesting. His concept is more ROI. Ours is more ROE, but we're in the same, the same field. But I have been doing it. Basically, took the torch from my father, Don Kirkpatrick, who developed 4 levels of evaluation back in the 1950s, and over the last 15 years or so, we've been kind of tweaking and supercharging it and supersizing it. We now call it the New World 4 levels. So it's about evaluating training programs and creating more value to the business.
Can you talk a little bit about how it's evolved over the years?
Well, it stayed pretty static for about 5 decades.
And then you got involved, right?
Yeah, a lot of.
Then you shook things up and got this thing on track.
Well, there were a lot of bad habits and a lot of things that the industry had kind of operationalized that really were not what my father's intent were, as far as starting with level 1, starting with training, and we just realized long ago that we need to start with a business, not with training.
And so can you talk about that? So once you made that determination, then what happened?
Well, we've been trying to get people to break bad habits is really what we've been trying to do for the last 10, 15 years. And a lot of that has to do with making sure you start with what the business is expecting from a training initiative rather than throwing something out there and hoping that somehow it creates some value that's going to be meaningful to business people. And we've been trying to educate people and certify people, starting with the end in mind and making sure that everything that does happen in the world of training and performance is designed to make a specific impact on the business, the mission, the vision, whatever of the organization.
So doesn't this rely a great deal on executive support? And if so, how do you go about getting that as a training or learning professional?
Well, one of the concepts that we talk about is we want to try and avoid having executives sign off on initiatives, because what they do then is they sign off on it, they sign a check, they put their feet up on the desk, and they hope that somehow training is going to deliver the power and the magic of those results.
So they think they're done. When the check is signed, then they're
Yep, and it just doesn't work that way. And we're trying to break the myth that the training event is powerful enough to create those kind of results. So we try and get them to sign on as far as being involved with accountability and support and being an active champion, rather than just waiting for the magic at the end.
And then when you align the training and you kind of integrate it into their culture, then it has a higher probability of succeeding?
Absolutely. We're really heavy on making sure that the training is leveraged into performance, because if performance doesn't change, if behaviors don't change, there's really no hope that the results are going to happen. And then, of course, the answer is send everybody back to training.
Right.
And,
job security, I like it.
And yet if people are really into designing training events, we think it's only a matter of time before they're replaced by YouTube, because that's a lot cheaper if people are only dumping content on their trainees. So we're really trying to create what we call a package or a formula for learning and performance rather than kind of focusing on events.
Now, these 4 levels, it's 4 levels, right, or is it 5?
It's 4.
Maybe you need a 5th,
Well, you'll be hearing about
maybe
that in a few minutes.
Next year, come back and we'll have level 5. All right, so these 4 levels, though, they're still timeless. There's still plenty of merit in the levels themselves. Is that accurate?
Absolutely.
That still makes plenty of sense. So what is the focus now? Is it trying to get learning professionals to do a better job at getting at each of the levels, or having them focus on some levels more than others, or speak to that some?
Well, there seems to have been a 5-decade love affair with levels 1 and 2, which are reaction to training and learning. and we talk about learning organizations and learning function and learning objectives. We're trying to get people to move beyond that into the behavior, into the performance, into the results. And they have to completely change their mindset of who they are as learning professionals or training professionals, and trying to emphasize more building a package that includes support and accountability at level 3, which is behavior, which will then lead to level 4. But there is still such a lobby and such a belief that once you deliver training, or once you have created learning, your job is done. And it just isn't.
Now, do you find that companies are more, the CEO or some leader reads an article in Inc. magazine about some new technique, and they're like, yeah, this will work for us, and then it's like kind of a patch they're putting on it. It's not really, it may not work in their culture. There could be a million reasons not to do it, but it's like the flavor of the month.
It is, and it's tempting, and it's really alluring that, if we can just do this new thing. A guy in Best Buy called it lipstick on a pig. You called it a patch. It's just trying to doll up these training events to make them look better, and with the allure that they're going to bring value, and they don't. It's got to be through the hard work of discipline, accountability, the right kind of support in the culture that's going to make the difference, and that's a harder sell than the patchwork is.
Because it would seem to me that you lose the trust of the employee, because if you're changing every 6 months, 12 months to a new silver bullet that's going to solve some problem, at some point, don't the employees just tune all this out and think that, look, last month you told me to do it this way, and now you're telling me to do it this way. Why should I believe anything you say?
So they just wait it out. And,
right.
And the trainers go in and promise all these things.
And everybody nods their head, and they're all rah-rah excited to go, and then 3 months later they're back to their old habits.
That's right. And all they have to do is wait it out. And we're trying to, as best we can, create the belief that it's going to take we call it a business partnership approach, that everybody has to work together versus the solution rather than
right. It sounds more holistic, that it's like you're trying to get right into the DNA. You're not just kind of superficially trying to attack this.
Exactly. Yep.
So let's go to the work itself. And I think you mentioned earlier in the conversation, you're certifying people to execute on this work. Is that accurate?
That's right.
All right. So let's say Business Radio X, a growing concern with a lot of training needs. We've developed some systems and processes that seem to be working. And one of your people comes in. Describe the work. Are we sitting down and maybe having level 4 discussions before we start trying to design training? Or just walk us through that engagement, if you would.
Yeah, you've got a good idea there. That's exactly what we do, is we start with the level 4 discussions rather than trying to say, here's a program that you should go through. We don't want to be part of the problem. We want to be part of the solution and model the solution. So we talk about what is it you're trying to do with your organization or your business. What will be the criteria for success? And then from there, we talk about what will be the pathway to get there.
And you're participating in this conference, this ACE conference. What is it, ASTD Conference and Exposition? You're participating in that this week. And you're speaking?
Yes.
And you've already done that, or you're going to go do that later?
Later.
This is the warm-up. See,
this is the warm-up. We're trying to get people excited about it.
So can you give us a sneak peek? Share some of what you're talking about?
Well, I'm going to be doing one of the keynote addresses and talking about starting with the end in mind, the results and how to do that, and especially how to have conversations with senior stakeholders to let them know that a certain level of effort is going to be required to accomplish their objectives. And it's a difficult conversation, but we're going to try and teach people how to be truthful with them about the level of effort. And then also talk about how to establish a support plan after training to make sure that people that have learned something, those people that you're talking about, rather than going back and fending for themselves, there's somebody or something, some process waiting to help them be successful. And then also how to streamline levels 1 and 2. Stone, as you were talking about, what levels are we trying to focus on?
Yeah.
How to streamline level 1 and 2 so they can redeploy their resources to levels 3 and level 4, especially for mission-critical programs.
Now, when you're talking to the stakeholders about this and you're telling them that not only do they have to write you a check, but they're going to have to do work too, how do those conversations go? How do you move them off that the premise of maybe the history that they've had where they're like, look, that's your problem. I wrote the check here. You figure this out.
You know what?
That never happens, I'm sure, right?
What we usually find has to happen, we work with government and military and
yeah, so there's no
not-for-profit.
bureaucracy there. So it's probably easy.
Well, okay, well, great, thanks. All right, on to the next one. What we usually find is that we have to create a success story within their organization and find 1 or 2 pilot programs with what we call bright lights that are business leaders on the other side that are willing to try this and pilot a program on leadership or customer service or something, create success, and then showcase that to the skeptics, the naysayers, and people that really aren't aware. But you can show them all the research and give them all the best guidance, but they almost always have to see something that worked in their organization before they're going to start to buy into it.
So then you have to just get them to agree to a pilot.
That's
to
it.
say, okay,
Yeah.
let's test it. And then how does that test come about? Like, who picks the test subject typically?
Yeah. Well, that's where we start with the learning people, and then we find out who on the other side of the bridge do you have a good relationship with.
So you're starting with an easy one. You're not going to the
That's
worst
what
case
we
scenario,
do.
right?
That's what we do. For instance, we work with Emirates Airlines in Dubai, and they identified a group that handles the call center and the
Right.
reservations, and they said, Paul Beach over there is a bright light. He's at least willing to give us a shot. Let's pilot it with him, and then have him and his team be the witness
Right.
to the other people in the organization to tell them this will work. When learning comes calling, give them a chance.
Now, when you do that, do you get agreement from the stakeholder that says, look, if I can pull this off with this guy, then you're going to deploy this across the board, or you do this kind of one step at a time?
You know, sometimes that works when we say, all right, give us a couple pilots. We'll show you the power of this
Right.
without extra resources, because we're trying to redeploy resources out of this silliness into
Right.
all the event training and stuff and redeploying them so we can show maximum results on the same resources. They said, if we show you that, will you be willing to deploy this further? And they say yes.
So you cost us the YouTube sponsorship a little earlier in the conversation, but you have some concerns about YouTube, right?
No, I think the electronic technology is great, but we have to be careful that it doesn't replace our industry. And if training continues to believe that they are about disseminating content,
Right, like a
they're in
commodity.
danger.
Right, it can't be
Then-
a commodity, right?
Yep, they're standing at the edge of the plank, ready to walk off.
They just don't know it yet.
Well, we're trying to clue them in a little bit, at least. And this isn't just us thinking this stuff up. These are Kirkpatrick ambassadors around the world that we work with, and that we use them to tell our story.
Right. Can you share maybe a success story where a company was having a problem and you were able to deploy this, and then you were able to make a significant change and difference?
No.
Nope. All right.
No,
Well, our
I'm
next
kidding.
guest maybe
I'm
able.
kidding. I'm kidding. One example would be with the Internal Revenue Service.
Oh wow! High fives for that.
We said, we'll help you as long as you don't audit us. They said, well, we can't promise that. But one guy was given a chance in a particular division to show this and implement this area. And after actually a lot of battling, because the legacy in the IRS was training oriented, and he was using a business partnership approach. And after battling the criticism, finally the deputy commissioner said, you know what, we need to do this across the house. So now they're in the midst of implementing this business partnership approach, end in mind, making sure things work rather than the training event approach.
Now, how did you measure success? Like, what were the metrics that proved that this was working?
Well, in the IRS, they have 3 what we call flags at the top of the mountain. Mm-hmm. One is generating revenue, from those who are supposed to be paying.
Right.
2 would be customer satisfaction, people feeling like they are treated positively and with respect.
Right.
And 3rd would be the employee satisfaction. Same thing, people believing that they are making a contribution, making a difference, and we had metrics for all those things. And
did you tell them I'll only do the bottom 2, and the first one you're on your own?
Well, it's interesting. We kind of, as this unfolded, they kind of, through this business partnership approach, made the customers more satisfied, the employees more satisfied, and the revenue generation was almost a kind of a byproduct of
Right.
that.
And I bet that happens a lot.
It does. And we look at this business partnership approach as almost always collateral benefit, because people feel cared for, they feel that they're not on their own waiting
Right.
for the next event, and they also are making a contribution that as individuals they can see. This is not just corporate return on expectations. This is individuals being able to see that they're making a difference to the greater good of the organization.
And I would imagine in the IRS that, I wouldn't think that a lot of IRS people are proud to tell their friends and family, hey, I work for the IRS.
They don't lead with that at the cocktail party.
Right, so if you can increase their dignity, it probably goes a long way.
Absolutely.
So you spoke earlier about streamlining the levels 1 and 2, and then we spent some time talking about levels 3 and 4. Speak to the backside, the post-training, the coaching, the reinforcement, the support. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I wrote a book a few years ago called Transferring Learning to Behavior because it was kind of in a fit of how upset I was that learning is the holy grail. So I thought, well, at least we'll put something out there as others have been trying to do, talking about behavior. So in it, we talk about two distinct forces, one of support, which is kind of encouraging people to apply what they learned, and the other is accountability, where you're kind of monitoring. It's kind of more of the stick and the carrot. So we talk about ahead of time as you're building an initiative. You don't just build the training event, you're building the support and accountability package. You get agreement on that, and then you start to monitor those things once people graduate from training, ensuring that those things are happening. You have dashboards, scorecards, and if things start to go south of the standards, you have already put in place. The leader is going to then challenge and say, hey, we're not holding people accountable enough. We're not encouraging enough. We're not reinforcing enough. Making sure that we ask and answer the question, is it working along the way, to then lead to, did it work?
Right, because isn't compliance, that's kind of the holy grail. You want everybody to be compliant, and you have to know going in that people are going to kind of slip up, right? You have to build mechanisms to catch the people when they slip up. And it's good for the person to know that, hey, something's going to be there. I know eventually I'm going to mess up, and someone's going to be there to kind of nudge me back into.
Are you speaking from experience or just hypothetical? You know what? And we cannot teach everybody in training. I don't care how good the training is. Everything that is going to happen on the job, there needs to be somebody or something there when they say, I'm stuck, or I forgot, or I've been thrown something. Somebody or something's got to be there to show them immediately when they need it, how to apply it,
right,
and how to handle the situation.
So when you build your machine, that's built into the process, right?
Yep.
All right, so let's get some real-world counsel here, because here's what I can see happens. My training manager meets with you or one of your certified folks, and they get fired up. They resonate with all this. It makes perfect sense. They buy the books. They get all studied up. Then they come to Lee and I as executive sponsors and owners of this business, and we're well-meaning. We think we're doing the right thing. We think that we have good discernment, good judgment, but there are some things that Lee and I are probably apt to do that could just shoot this thing right in the hind end. What are some things that we...
It's him more than me.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure.
But what are some mistakes that we as executives might make that could shut this whole thing down, and or conversely, what are some things that we could do that could really give this thing a real shot?
Well, some of the mistakes are to not do what you agreed to do ahead of time, because we want to make sure we create some kind of learning and performance agreement, that you agree that you're going to monitor people's balanced scorecards, or you're going to do some informal recognition.
Follow through.
That's it. That's pretty much it. And I'm telling you, if we could get you two, as executives, to model the way, others start to pick up on it, and you start to create a culture change. And this Kirkpatrick 4 levels is no longer a course by course kind of thing, is
right,
where my dad invented it, is really trying to change a culture to one of learning and performance, accountability, support. And we have different certification programs we call bronze and silver and gold that really carry not only the training people but the business people through the process, holding each other accountable with other people from other companies, just like you guys, as we have phone calls on a regular basis and webinars to do what we can to ensure that you guys do what you agreed to do.
What a delight having you come in the studio and visit with us this morning. We got to give a shout out to our good buddies over at Training Pros. They're always bringing us competent, passionate folks that are making a real difference in the world. And man, I'm so glad you came. You got to come back sometime. You got plenty to talk about, don't you? I
got a few more things. Yeah, give me a call. I enjoy this. And you know what? You guys are making it easy by asking the right questions and poking the right things. And I appreciate it.
Well, we're delighted to do it. But before we wrap this segment, let's make sure that our listeners know how to reach out, maybe get their hands on the book that you mentioned, and where they can reach out to talk with someone and have a meaningful conversation about these 4 levels in this new world.
Well, there's the first question you caught me on. I wish my wife was here. She'd say,
She's the
Jim,
one in charge of
don't
that.
you know our phone number? No, I do know that it's information@kirkpatrickpartners.com. And for lack of my memory of what our official phone numbers are, the best local one here is 770-683-2846. And we are real people. This is a real model, and we're glad to answer any questions people have.
And your website is kirkpatrickpartners.com.
Oh, very good. Thank you.
Good research,
See that?
Lee.
Watching
That's
your
right.
back. Yeah,
Okay, I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for this Kirkpatrick Quick Tip. For more information, visit our website at kirkpatrickpartners.com. Register with us to receive the weekly Quick Tip delivered right to your inbox and access to all of our online resources library with over 60 items.